Rita Frost from Dogwood Alliance. And Rita is the campaigns director at Dogwood Alliance, based in North Carolina in the southern USA. And Dogwood Alliance advances environmental justice and climate action by mobilizing diverse voices to protect southern forests and communities from industrial logging. And Rita has worked at Dogwood Alliance for over 6 years, tracking and tracing the biomass industry in the forests of the southern USA to expose their truly destructive practices. Thank you so much for joining us, Rita. It's absolutely brilliant to be here with you. And I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sally. Hi, everybody. Hi, y'all. I'm very happy to be here with y'all today. Very excited to see that people are trying to mobilize on Drax and Vattenfall. And I actually want to take y'all with my presentation over the next 5 minutes down into the forests of the southern United States, one of the primary sourcing regions for both of these companies. So before it even gets over to y'all side of the ocean to be burned, first they have to produce the pellets here in the forests. So let's see, I'm gonna share my screen with y'all and then we can get going. Can everybody see that? Yep, okay, great. Great, awesome. So this is just the first depiction of what biomass impacts on the forest floor looks like. I have been, as Sally said, I've been tracking and tracing Enviva as well as Drax. Enviva and Drax both produce wood pellets on the ground, and every single time we go out into the field, this is what we find. We find that the southern United States ends up being a sacrifice zone for other countries' energy needs. Dogwood's investigations are finding disturbing patterns where wood pellets are harvested from our native hardwood forests. So these aren't always just plantation forests, as you might hear from the industry. Instead, they're really coming from natural bottomland hardwood forests. And they're so special that they've even been designated as a global biodiversity hotspot, which means that this is one of the places in the United States where you can find some of our highest rates of endemic species that can be found nowhere else on the planet. And yet they're incredibly threatened because of demand for products such as biomass wood pellets. One of the things that I think is important to bring up, and I'm sure many of y'all are aware of here, is that biomass gets by because of its green, quote unquote, green image, but it's quickly losing that image with policymakers and financial institutions. Just as 2 quick examples, at the end of 2021, Citi downgraded Drax on its less attractive reward and risk, and we thought that that was a big victory. Furthermore, that same month, we saw a group of cross-party policymakers in the UK also question support of biomass. This is important because biomass is incredibly reliant, entirely reliant even, on subsidies that are coming from governments. It could not be a viable industry if it was not being subsidized at the amount that it is. These are pictures of trucks that we follow from the site, from the forest floor, where we're seeing that logging happening, all the way back into Enviva's facilities so that we can confirm that Enviva is actually indeed sourcing in this way. Just showing these pictures of these trucks to show that they aren't residues. They aren't waste wood. It's not waste wood. It's not just coming off of one logging operation that was supposed to be for pulp, paper, or lumber and ending up going to biomass. No, biomass is increasing the reach of logging, and it's also making logging practices much worse on the forest floor because they can be indiscriminate in what they take. On the social side of things, Sally mentioned this too, but communities in the South are routinely protesting against wood pellet production facilities from being built. They're saying that industrial logging and wood production are not a way to develop strong rural economies. If it was, then rural communities across the coastal plain would be some of the wealthiest in the world, right? Because we are one of the world's largest wood producing regions. And yet, the southern United States is constantly left behind in terms of economic development. We're finding instead that our community members in rural communities where Enviva has wood pellet facilities are disproportionately suffering high poverty rates, unemployment rates, and exhibit other indicators of socioeconomic stress, such as a large amount of health problems. Bringing it over to y'all's side of the ocean, I just want to also point out that these protests are not just where the wood pellets are being produced. We're also quite proud that this movement is in countries like the Netherlands too. In 2020, 98% of Dutch citizens polled favored ending subsidies for biomass. Dutch activists and campaigners are pushing their government to choose better sources of renewable energy and to leave southern forests alone. And we're excited that this movement continues to grow, especially with folks like y'all, because we know that the way to get change is through policy. We have to demand policy change. It's not going to come just through the industry itself. We even see really awesome headlines like this, Dutch to limit forest biomass subsidies, possibly signaling EU sea change. I think the same could be true potentially with the UK. If we can get a change in the UK and the way that the UK subsidizes biomass, then we could see other dominoes fall with other countries, because the UK is so reliant on biomass. If they can find a new way forward, then others can too. And then finally, this is just again to exhibit that the news around biomass is global. It's not just in the United Kingdom, and it's not just in the southern United States. We're seeing that reporters everywhere are trying to shed light on this issue, and we're excited about that. And we know that we have to keep up the momentum by also raising our voices as the public. So I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Sally.
That was wonderful, Rita. Thank you so much. And as you're saying, the policy change is what we really need. We need to put pressure on our politicians to stop subsidizing this terrible industry. Has anyone got any questions for Rita? Emily, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, sorry, I've got COVID, so please excuse me. What is it happening in the US to try and protect the forests? So there's so much that we can do here, but, I don't know much about what you can do in the US to protect these sites.
Yeah, so I think that one of the hardest parts about protecting our forests here stateside is that there is little to no regulations about what logging can do. And the primary reason that happens, Emily, is because forests in the southern United States are primarily owned by private landowners. 90% of our forests are owned by private landowners. And in the United States, private land is like a religion. It can't be touched. It's very much a place where government says hands off. We won't tell private landowners what to do with their forests. So for us as advocates at Dogwood Alliance, a lot of our policy focus actually is overseas. It is coming from the places where the subsidies are determined, because we're saying that there should be a better use for sustainable energy subsidies, renewable energy subsidies, and trying to show that through our voices as well as what's happening on the ground. And then from the community perspective, communities are speaking out and trying to get in contact with their local policymakers. The dynamic there, again, kind of gets hamstrung by the fact that many of these community members that deal with the pollution of the wood pellet production facilities aren't the land-owning class. They're not the landholders themselves. And so the local policymakers will turn back to them, and they will also say, well, I can't tell a landowner what to do and what not to do. So our theory of change very much stems from policy change. We need a paradigm shift for how we view our forests, how we value our forests, and also how we're implementing justice for communities that have been systemically left behind in the United States.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rita. We've also got a great question from Nick. Can we find reports, or where can we find the reports that show Drax don't use residues?
Yeah, so I'm happy to put a link in the chat too. Dogwood Alliance produces our investigative report every single year alongside Natural Resources Defense Council and Southern Environmental Law Center, just to show our tracking and tracing of the industry on the ground here in the southern United States.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And our final question is from Mike. You're right that policy is essential to change this. Do you have any politicians that will try to change policy, as that's an essential element?
So Sally, I know you can probably speak to this as well, but a lot of the champions that we're finding are they're slowly coming up. They're slowly coming out of the woodworks. We need more leadership from our policymakers in the southern United States, for sure. We absolutely need folks in the southern United States to be trying to question the paradigm. But we're seeing more of our environmental champions actually coming from the halls of parliament in the United Kingdom, as well as small members of parliament in the European Union.
Brilliant, thank you. And there is an amazing campaign we're going to be hearing about a little bit later on called Cut Carbon Not Forests, that Rita, Katie, Tegan and I are all part of. And Cut Carbon Not Forests is asking MPs to take action to protect forests by transferring these huge subsidies away from the biomass industry to genuine renewables. And I've just put in a link to the chat box where you can contact your MP. It'd be absolutely amazing if you'd like to write to them and ask them to stop these subsidies. And we're just going to move on now to our next speaker, but don't worry, if you still have more questions for Rita, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by our second speaker today. This is Tegan Hansen from Stand.Earth, based in British Columbia in Canada. And Tegan is the forest campaigner with Stand.Earth. And she has a background in direct action and climate advocacy. And she works for the protection of old growth and primary forests in Canada. And Tegan was absolutely incredible during COP26. She organized amazing press conferences and she was speaking at actions and did just the most wonderful job standing up for forests. And we're absolutely thrilled to be with her here tonight. Thank you so much, Tegan.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and for having me. I'm really thrilled to be speaking to you all today. And, you know, it's really interesting to hear this context from Rita in the southern US and to compare it to what we're seeing here in British Columbia, which is really devastating. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why these forests in BC are so important and why we're trying to protect them, and about the growing threat, especially from Drax and the wood pellet industry. So first of all, forests in British Columbia are incredibly rare and diverse and important, both locally and on a global scale, all the way from, you know, the boreal and the boreal forest in the north to rainforest, temperate rainforests on the coast and in the interior. This is a picture from the inland temperate rainforest, which is near Prince George in the central interior of British Columbia. And this is one of the last forests of its type in the world. It's also one of the most, these temperate rainforests are among the most carbon-rich forests on the planet. So they're hugely important for our global fight against climate change. And they're incredibly rich biodiverse forests, you know, home to some incredible species like caribou, which are now unfortunately in many areas critically endangered and starting to disappear. And in fact, the whole inland temperate rainforest is now considered on the verge of ecological collapse. And that's been largely because of decades and decades of overlogging. And typically in British Columbia, the industry has centered around dimensional lumber, you know, your kind of traditional home building, what you would expect in building materials. But what we're seeing recently is these types of clear cuts are not actually for lumber, but they're for wood pellets. So this is a photo from Conservation North, which is an amazing volunteer-based group I'd encourage everyone to follow, based in Prince George. And these photos were from Pinnacle cut blocks in the north. But this company, as Sally talked about earlier, was recently acquired by Drax. And Drax also, this Pinnacle used to be the biggest pellet company in British Columbia. The second biggest was Pacific Bioenergy, and Drax recently also acquired Pacific Bioenergy's contracts. So they now have a virtual monopoly on the wood pellet industry in British Columbia. And as we were talking about before with residues, a lot of the kind of selling feature of this industry in BC to residents here has been, well, you know, there's so much waste, you know, sawdust and and residuals like bark and branches and whatnot, and either it gets burned in slash piles in these clear cuts, or it's just wasted. And so we're going to build pellet plants to make use of that waste. In reality, this is what pellet plants look like. This is a log, just one log yard at one pellet plant in Burns Lake in northern British Columbia, and they're full of logs. And these company, Drax now has their own logging permits. So effectively is a logging company as well as a burner of biomass. And this is really significant because Canada is the second largest exporter of wood pellets in the world. And about 80% of that comes out of British Columbia. These companies have been saying for years that the only place they now have to get more fiber to meet their demands, their growing demands for contracts, is the forest. They've been renovating their plants so that they can grind more and bigger logs. And there's now plant proposals going in that are wholly based on logging with no residuals whatsoever. And in terms of Drax's impact, around the world, what was interesting is last year for the United Kingdom has long been our #1 customer here in BC of wood pellets coming from British Columbia. But last year there was a slight decline in our exports to the UK, but a massive increase in our exports to Japan. And so Drax is, increasing its supply of wood pellets to these other companies as well. And so when we think of, what you're advocating against in terms of subsidies to this company, it's also how they're supporting the company to supply other countries with this dirty fuel. And really the threat of this industry means in British Columbia is more destruction of these forests, which are so vital for the planet and also for our communities. We have relied on forests in BC for a long time to help shelter our communities from the impacts of climate change, floods, fires, and that kind of thing. And we're just coming out of last year a really devastating year in BC for wildfires and a heat wave that was very deadly, and deadly landslides and floods, which in a lot of cases were made worse by overlogging. And so when we look at the risk of growing this industry, which has a lot of opposition to it from communities, but also from workers, because it's a terrible jobs creator, like Rita was talking about. We're also looking at the longevity of our communities as we're dealing with a changing climate. And so what we're doing to oppose this industry directly, we have a real, kind of information battle to pick up in British Columbia, because this is a very new industry in British Columbia by comparison to traditional forestry. And it doesn't make sense to people that they're logging for wood pellets. And so getting that information out has been a real focal point, and I'll share links to these resources in the past. But also there's been really great documentation by Conservation North, and others that I'd love to share with you so you have handy for your work at the AGM, Drax's AGM next week. And this is part of a global effort to protect forests. And so in British Columbia, we're really contending with the last, trying to protect the last of the old growth and primary forests that are left here. There's been massive protests in the last year in British Columbia, including the largest act of civil disobedience in Canada's history, in an effort to protect the remaining old growth forests that are still being targeted and are still largely unprotected. And so while our government has pledged that they're going to put temporary logging bans in these forests, we're not seeing those go into effect just yet. And we really need the pressure on both sides from here in BC and also from other countries where these products are going, so that we can really effectively and quickly protect these forests before they effectively disappear forever. And I wanted to end with this picture from the inland temperate rainforest. So it really speaks to the madness of this sector and what they're saying about carbon capture. These forests, like I said, they're among the most carbon rich in the world. A lot of that carbon is stored in the soil and it's disturbed when they're clear cut. And some studies have looked at these temperate rainforests and found it would take over 500 years for them to recover the majority of the carbon they stored prior to logging. But once they're logged, they don't usually get the chance because then they're put into a logging cycle and cut every 100 years or so. And so really we're, fighting for our future on a global scale. And I just wanted to thank you all for your work and leave you with kind of the importance of what we're doing here. And I'll share resources in the chat, but happy to answer any questions.
That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Tegan. We have a couple of questions. Let's have a look. One of them was from Daniel. How similar are the tensions between locals and biomass facilities in British Columbia and southeastern USA? Is frustration primarily with the corporates or with local and state government?
It's an interesting question. The context is quite different in British Columbia. It was really fascinating to get that perspective from Rita on private land ownership. So, and I'll preface this by saying every bit of British Columbia is Indigenous land. However, the provincial and federal governments here consider about 93% of British Columbia to be Crown land, which is our version of public land. But in true form to our colonial history, that the whole use of that land has essentially developed around facilitating the extraction of natural resources. And that's very much still how Canada operates. And so when we're looking at tensions, the tension is largely, I'd say, with the provincial government. A lot of the protests have been focused on the province as a whole, and especially because we've had so many promises that our decision makers are going to act, and because they have the control over this land effectively. However, there is also a difficult situation in forest communities with these timber companies. Even the more traditional timber companies supply logs and fiber to pellet companies, and a lot of people in communities rely on these companies for their work. And so it's difficult, even though there's tensions, it's difficult for folks to take action. And I know, Jen, I see your hand up and you might want to speak to this, and maybe if we could, because you're based in Prince George and you see a lot of this, in real life happening. I don't know if we can understand.
Yeah, I just, our economy and our story of what it means to be living in these logging-based communities is so attached to things not changing. So we don't have the same sort of movement that citizens are pushing for, like in the Southern United States, but it's coming, and it's just whether it comes when we have nothing left. So it'll come because we're going to be out of logs like tomorrow, and the ecological collapse is going to follow, and the economical collapse of that industry will follow that. So it's just a matter of whether it comes. Will we still have enough of these primary forests to maintain our biodiversity? And some of that biodiversity is going to be gone even if we stop tomorrow, like our precious mountain caribou, and fisher are another thing. My question that I was going to ask Tegan about is, can you comment on why it's important that we don't only focus on whether these pellets come from residues or not? Because part of our subsidy program in BC is to take wood that the industry considers waste, but these are whole trees, hemlock, cedars, Douglas firs that have started their natural process of heart rot. And so even if we focus on just talking about whole trees, the industry still calls these things waste. And if you could maybe speak a bit about that.
Yeah, excellent. Very good question. And thanks so much, Jen, for that perspective. It's so true. Scientists have told us, if we don't do anything, the industry is going to be gone in some places in the province in 5 years, because that's how long these forests have left of logging. It's very frightening and very difficult. And we're, in the midst of trying to convince our government to act when it's in their best interest not to, because they're making tons of money and the subject of this lobbying. And to your question, yes. So one of the really insidious ways that the provincial government in British Columbia operates is by calling very healthy, very natural forest waste. And this takes a number of forms. So in British Columbia, if a tree does not have value in a traditional mill, it is waste. That means all like broadleaf trees, healthy deciduous trees, which is more than half of the boreal forest, where they're building a new pellet plant, that is considered waste. And then areas where there's been natural forest fires, which is how many of these forests stay healthy and reproduce, or insect infestations, which again is a part of a forest process, that is then considered waste, and those areas are clear cut, which clear cutting a forest that's burned recently is one of the most destructive things you can do for that forest. And, it is really all just kind of a propaganda to try to justify this industry that makes absolutely no sense from a community, from a worker, from a climate perspective. And our government in Canada and British Columbia, they're experts at this. This is how they've operated for 100 or so years. And so what we have to do is really understand that these forests have value in every stage of their life, and natural forests decay and build healthy soils and have different varieties in the ecosystems to provide habitat. And so I just encourage you, if you're seeing information about waste or residuals being used, it's really not, it's either a lie or it's just not that simple.
Thank you.
That helps.
Tegan, that was wonderful. And just absolutely vital for us to take action next week. We're going to be hearing a little bit later about what we can do next Wednesday. Anywhere in the world we can take action online, and we can also take action outside the AGM. And thank you so much, Tegan. That was just brilliant, and highlighting how valuable every part of a forest is, that there's such precious ecosystems that we must protect. And to hear more about another country which is being impacted by Drax's tree burning, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Farištamo Eller, who is from Save Estonia's forest, based in Estonia. And Farištamo is a communication manager at an animal advocacy organization, and all of her free time goes towards protecting wonderful forests in Estonia. She believes that profit at the cost of life is complete loss. Farištamo is also an amazing musician. She's a pianist and she works in a music academy, but she feels that nature and animals are even more important at the moment than her longing to play the piano and to play music. So we're absolutely thrilled that she's with us here today, and she's going to tell us more about logging in Estonia and how we can take action to protect these wonderful forests. Thank you so much, Farištamo.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I have a friend, and he gave me yesterday an album with a lot of photos he has made during his past 5 years when he has worked in this forest protection area. And at that time, when I saw these photos, I thought that I will show some of them first. This is natural park in 10 years, how much logging, how the machine is in them. Again, another national park, logging there. Another national park. Here it's written that someone wrote actually that this kind of logging kills birds during nesting peace time. Another national park. Mm-hmm. He calls it his testimony because he doesn't do that anymore. And this was the thing I thought it is important to talk about, the need to care and the way how industries make us believe that society doesn't have to care. Biomass, it is told us that this is something to be used, but actually it is life. And everything what is done here to get this biomass, also to get the subsidies, this kills that life. Right now in Estonia, there are a lot of people who are fighting against these kind of loggings. And there is another part of people who even don't realize that these kind of loggings are happening in national parks, for example, and already in the cities or near the cities where people are going to hike or jogging. And this is happening because there is not enough forests anymore. So basically, they don't have material. And another thing what is happening is that trees that have been cut down, they are younger and younger. So this kind of old forests, like 100 and more, they say that there is less than 2%, but people kind of imagine that Estonia is still this kind of forest land. And that's why these kind of people who don't know what is happening, they are taking this kind of messages what calm they down, and they're okay with this biomass, because the question is then, yeah, but what are we going to do? But this shouldn't be the question. Also, the question shouldn't be how many birds there are for on this hectare or in another hectare or in different kind of woods. We know that in the forest there are birds, so it should be forbidden, for example, to log during the time when there is nesting peace. In the same time, it should be normal that these kind of machines, they are not sinking in this kind of soil, because this destroys life. In Estonia, we don't have this kind of law what protects soil. It was a time when they started to work that law, but then it stopped. So basically, they can do whatever, because the soil is not being protected by law. And then these kind of things happen, and people, they don't see it, because when you ride the car and in these big streets, you don't see these kind of things. Today, I had to go somewhere in a small place. I saw so many places like that. And about the data, there is a lot of data everywhere. But right now, for example, in Estonia, the data, what they use to get them numbers to make up their mind, let's say how much it is okay to log, this data the entire data collection process is coordinated and controlled by the same two people at the Environment Agency. And this data, it's not public. So basically, scientists, they don't get all the data to control it. And voluntary environmental organizations have taken possession of some of this data. And it is clear that in this data, there are many problems. So basically, this kind of subsidies and burning biomass, this makes people cut everything and not to think about life, because it's all about money, right? So that's basically, I think, what I want to say, that we should change the ideology, and we have to say, or we have to understand, we of course here to understand probably, but more widely, that forests can't be planted, trees can be planted. That is one reason why I really don't like this kind of big campaigns that plant trees and save the world. We need to protect the forests we already have. In Estonia, there are, they give money, like again, subsidies for planting trees. But to plant trees, you make this clear cut, then you get money and you plant trees. Very nice. And again, and of course, if you get it as a biomass, then you have another subsidy. So this subsidization system makes people to cut these trees, but this kind of ideology that we can always plant trees makes these kind of subsidies possible. So if we will change it, then probably maybe this problem, or at least one part of that problem, will change. And the last thing is that what I want to point out is the valuation of life. To be able to burn biomass, to be able to make these kind of clear cuts, I see it as a mindset that life is not valuable, only people's life is. So in that sense, if we as humankind could see ourselves in this world with everyone else, and if we go to the forest, that we could feel that this is really home, not my property. I mean, how can we see forest as a property? It's so many creatures live there. Then we wouldn't be able to do these kind of destructions there. That's all. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Farištamo. And just such a profound point that forests are not a property, they're our home, and that you cannot plant a forest. There's such a precious ecosystem and we absolutely need to protect. Thank you. We've had a question about whether evidence exists that trees are being logged for biomass and not for timber, like for the building industry. And I think Lena put in an amazing report called Hidden Inside a Wood Pellet into the chat box, which does show the evidence that these trees in Estonian forests are being logged for biomass. Would you like to say any more about it, Farištamo?
Yes, that is very good that there are now reports and films done that really show that big trees go to biomass and they burn them, they make granule out of them. And this industry, what makes what is the word? Anyways, if the tree is too big, then these machines don't take it. So there are so many problems. And today I was in a forest and then I realized that actually we are really controlled by robots and machines who say that we need to cut down younger trees. We don't think about how many different species live on that one tree, for example, who is 200 years, or okay, this one lives 140, what I am thinking of. But in Estonia, you can cut down this tree when it is 40. So this life can never go there if you take this cutting seriously, as they say.
Amazing. Oh, thank you so much. The good news is that there are lots of things that we can do to stand up to these companies, and we're going to be hearing about that in a couple of moments. But in particular, we're going to be taking action next Wednesday for the Drax AGM and for the AGM of another huge biomass company called Vattenfall. And I'm delighted that Almut Ernsting, who is the co-founder of Biofuelwatch, an incredible forest campaigner and researcher, is going to tell us more about this Swedish biomass company and why we need to take action to stand up to Vattenfall's tree burning next Wednesday for the International Day of Action. And then we're going to be hearing more about how we can take action for Drax's AGM as well. Thank you so much, Almut.
I'm going to say a few words about Vattenfall, the biomass burning, and how it's linked to the so-called Swedish forestry model, and then say a bit about why this is really important for the actions next Wednesday. So, first of all, who is Vattenfall? Vattenfall is fully owned by the Swedish state. It's a multinational energy company. Well, it's actually Europe. It's an energy generator within Europe, but also trades with biomass, possibly fossil fuels, but certainly biomass from outside Europe. It used to be, for many, many years, one of the EU's EU 28s at the time, top 3 CO2 emitters from fossil fuels. And then in 2018, Vattenfall rebranded itself with the motto fossil-free living within one generation. Obviously way too late within one generation, but yeah, that was their rebrand. Much of it in response to the increasing drive from member states and from countries, EU member states and other countries to phase out coal. Vattenfall still burns coal. It burns a lot of fossil gas. So the coal burning because of the phase out has gone down, but the fossil gas hasn't gone down at all. Vattenfall does, unlike Drax, it does have investments in clean renewable energy, especially wind energy. So in the UK, actually the whole portfolio is in wind, especially offshore wind. But increasingly and worryingly, Vattenfall is investing in more and more in biomass energy. This is from their website. It's a map of their biomass plants. Yeah, you can see most of them are in Sweden. There's at the moment a small one in the Netherlands and one in Berlin. But in, there we go. But in addition, they also trade, they're also a trader of wood chips and wood pellets to other energy companies, at the moment coming from the southeastern USA, the Baltic states, until recently from Russia too. Okay, right. Expansion, the expansion plans, which is one of the big reasons why there's this International Day of Action coming up. So they recently opened yet another biomass plant in Sweden. We don't really know about the Swedish pipeline. It's quite difficult to get that information. But one big one just opened in Diemen in the Netherlands, right next to Amsterdam. There's big opposition against the proposed 120 megawatt biomass heat plant. So biomass always biomass meaning wood here. Even the local authority is opposing it, but Vattenfall is still not cancelled. They've not started yet, but not cancelled plans. And in Berlin, they're already co-firing. They've been co-firing wood in Moabit power station, which burns mostly coal at the moment, the one in the picture, since at least 2010. But they're now planning, or they've started moving towards a 6-fold increase of wood burning in Berlin, with a brand new unit plant at Moabit and another one at an existing fossil gas plant. Now, what the other reason? So this is the expansion plans that really worry a lot of us, a lot of people working on biomass across Europe. Now, and the trading, which includes the southeastern USA and the Baltic states, which you already heard about. sorry, is there screen sharing going? Just paused. Oh, hopefully it's okay. Okay, okay. So, but the other reason is that it's the Swedish, that they are key proponents of the Swedish forestry model. Okay, yeah. So, and the Swedish forestry model is, you know, very much a model that is based on a clear cutting of natural forest ecosystem and the replacements with monoculture tree plantations, as you can see on the top top right picture, the plantations. And then, of course, you know, once they come to a certain size, they're clear cut again and replanted. So, you know, a very kind of extreme, I would say, so very extreme mechanized forestry tree plantation model. And a few pictures of the forests that ask them, you know, why, you know, Sweden's forests are so really precious, and the fact that they are being clear cut at a rapid speed is really terrible. So these are, you know, just some of the pictures. Important to know that the boreal forests in Sweden are also important for the livelihoods and of the indigenous Sami people, who are, you know, whose ancestral land rights and rights to the forests are being, you know, very much threatened and violated by logging companies. So this is the Swedish forestry model in general. And remember, Vattenfall is part of the Swedish state. And importantly, in a document by the International Renewable Energy Association 2019, they pointed out that they developed me the horrible title bioenergy from boreal forests. They pointed out that the whole framing of sustainability issues in Sweden started with the Vattenfall project as early as 1990. I mean, the Swedish forestry model is even older, but the whole framing of classing this model as sustainable, Vattenfall has played a really crucial role in that. And in fact, I would also say, you know, when the pellets that you saw on the the pellets produced from the forest clear cut in Estonia and in the southern United States, where you saw the pictures, they are mostly certified by what's called the Sustainable Biomass Program. And Vattenfall, as well as Drax, were co-founders, but Vattenfall actually had, by that time it was set up, already got its own sustainability standards, which were very, very instrumental in framing this really flawed idea of what sustainable biomass, very heavily based on the Swedish forestry model. So that's a quick overview of why we are really worried about what Vattenfall is doing on the biomass side, and we want them to, you know, we want them to stop the expansion and get out of burning any carbon fuels. Of course, fossil fuels too, also mixed waste, and certainly wood. I mean, all of them, and move towards, you know, really clean, just you know, the clean, non-emissive renewables and more efficiency and conservation. There's a letter that we can put in there. I put a link in. There's an open letter to Vattenfall sent last week by 16 NGOs for environmental groups from 6 different countries. And yeah, what can you do? So next Wednesday, please, I know you'll all be, you know, we all want you to be tweeting about Drax. Please absolutely do, but please see if you are tweeting or taking selfies, if you can do that with, you know, with a tweet about Vattenfall too. This will be added to Biofuelwatch's social media pack on by Friday lunchtime. It'll be there. So please see if you can make space for both. And if you're in London on Wednesday, please, there'll first be a protest outside the Drax AGM, but afterwards, please, if you can, stay around and go along and accompany, others from Biofuelwatch. I'm in Scotland, sadly I can't go to it, but others from Biofuelwatch and different groups to go to the Argos Biomass Conference, where not just Drax, but also Vattenfall will have a speaker, and where we will have a banner actually with this picture as well, so we get a really nice photo call to share and support this day of action. There'll be different things happening elsewhere, but the social media action anyone can take part in.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Almut. And we did have a question from Rosemary. Could you repeat what you said about Vattenfall in the UK? She missed
Yes.
what you said.
So in the UK, the actual energy investments are mainly, I think, only or mainly in wind. So we're not worried about those. This is part of a wider day of action, and Vattenfall, you know, they are big proponents, and the reason we are targeting them at the biomass conference is that they are actually speaking, you know, about expanding the pellet trade and expanding, you know, trading in biomass and using it. So although the UK investments are not in biomass, they are, you know, really a big player in the push for biomass expansion overall, and they have. It's also in, you know, solidarity with people in Germany and the Netherlands, where there is the expansion happening, and in Sweden, of course. Most of the wood they're burning at present comes from Sweden and is burned in Sweden, but, you know, the more they expand elsewhere, the more likely they are to also then themselves start burning from the Baltics and the United States.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And as Almut was telling us, we've got this really, really important day of action coming up next Wednesday. And the good news is that there are lots of things that we can do together to take on Vattenfall, Drax and the biomass industry. By working together, we really can make a difference to take on these companies. And a key way we can take action is by challenging the enormous subsidies that are fueling this industry and helping companies like Drax to burn so many trees. And Biofuelwatch is really thrilled to be part of an amazing international coalition called Cut Carbon Not Forests with Dogwood Alliance, Stand.Earth, the Natural Resources Defence Council, who are based in the US, and also the Southern Environmental Law Centre. And together we are asking MPs in the UK to take urgent action to protect forests, wildlife, communities and the climate from the biomass industry by transferring over £1 billion in UK renewable subsidies from tree burning to genuinely renewable wind and solar power. And we'll put the link in for contacting your MP, and we'll also send out all these links in an email tomorrow, so don't worry if you can't catch them yet in the chat. And by transferring these subsidies from biomass burning to renewables, we could help to protect forests, wildlife, communities and the climate. And it would also support new green jobs in areas like wind and solar energy, and support a just transition for Yorkshire and the surrounding areas. And another great way you can take action is by joining an amazing new coalition called the Stop Burning Trees Coalition. Some of you, I think, on this call are in this amazing coalition. It's including groups from Friends of the Earth, from the Axe Drax group, Extinction Rebellion, the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Coalition, trade union groups and other environmental groups, especially in the north of England, but it's open to absolutely everyone. Everyone is welcome to join. And we have a sign up form where you can find out more information. And we're meeting every couple of weeks and planning what we can do to stand up to Drax and the biomass industry. And in particular, we are planning for next Wednesday for the AGM for Vattenfall and Drax's AGM and the big biomass conference in London. And if you happen to be in London next Wednesday, or you know someone who is, it would be brilliant if they'd like to come along to our demonstration outside Drax's AGM in Aldersgate Street in London. We're going to be meeting there from 11:30 in the morning and then moving to the big biomass conference, which is near the O2 Arena and Greenwich in the afternoon. And if you have any suggestions for fun, creative actions, that would be brilliant. And we can put the links in again. And also there are going to be incredible actions planned in the north of England, in York, Hull, Liverpool, and in Leeds. There are plans for an amazing climate jobs fair, which is really, really exciting. And we're going to be highlighting in Leeds that there are lots of great green alternatives to biomass burning, and we don't need to rely on this dangerous false industry. And also, wherever you are in the world, it would be brilliant if you would like to take action by sharing a photo on social media with a message telling Drax and Vattenfall to stop burning trees. And these are examples of some of the pictures from last year. And you can take a picture maybe near a tree or plant or a park, anywhere you like, with a message to say stop burning trees. And we have a social media pack that we'll be sharing. It's pretty much ready, so we could share a link tonight, and also it will be going out on Friday. And it's going to have example tweets and pictures that you can use to tell Drax and Vattenfall to stop burning trees. And I'm absolutely thrilled now to pass on to our final speaker tonight, Merry Dickinson, who's an incredible campaigner with the Axe Drax group and the Stop Burning Trees Coalition. And Merry is going to tell us a bit more about some of the plans for next week and how you can take action. Thank you so much, Merry.
Hello, everyone. So the Axe Drax Coalition is, well, the Axe Drax and the Stop Burning Trees Coalition, we're all sort of made up from a wide variety of groups across the north and also across UK and more globally. It's sort of Axe Drax started as quite a grassroots coalition just before the first lockdowns came in, but have been involved in a range of like protests outside courts, outside Drax, along the railway, and just been mobilising for the AGM coming up. So as Sally said, there is a range of actions going on, as mentioned in London, Hull, Leeds, York and Liverpool, which if you can get to those, please do. Links to all of those will be sent out. And also if you're in the north or anywhere and would like to host one, let us know. We can definitely support you with like banners and leaflets and everything like that. But if you can't make it to one of those, which is not a problem, we have a range of digital actions that you can get involved with. So as mentioned, there's the social media toolkit, which has a whole range of different ways to get involved, from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, examples of that. And there's also lots of key facts on there, messaging documents, all sort of framed around this core Stop Burning Trees hashtag and headline, which we're just trying to really hammer home to people as much as possible. As part of that, we're planning a sort of Twitter storm targeting primarily Drax, BEIS and MPs. So BEIS is the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. They're the ones who are responsible for giving Drax all the money used to fund all of the destruction that we've just heard about. And as coming up this year, they're releasing a new biomass policy document, which is sort of going to be setting the scene for how they're going to be subsidising it, how it's going forward. And as we know, Drax is applying for more money to fund BECS, which is ridiculous, but they're doing it. So the time now is really to put as much pressure on BEIS as much as possible, and particularly MPs like Kwasi Kwarteng, who is the Secretary of State for BEIS, and also Greg Hands, who's the Minister for Clean Growth and Industrial Energy, I think, which is all very silly terminology. But so targeting them both on Twitter and also using things like phone swarms and emailing them. In the social media pack, there is a way to find the phone number for your MP, the email for your MP, and all of their like Twitter handles and everything like that. So we're basically asking people to put as much pressure as we can digitally on this day to get as many MPs aware of biomass, what is it, why it's such a scam, and then start putting pressure on BEIS to take these subsidies away from them. So then, if you can do things like take a picture or record a small message of why biomass is such a scam, why we need to stop burning trees, that would be incredible. But also, if you don't want your face in it, that's very okay. But if you can make like lovely signs or put them in trees, we've had lots of pictures of people previously that they put them with their pet and they've looked really adorable, and those work very well on social media. And there's in the social media toolkit, there's links to documents that can provide talking points and all the videos and facts and documents that have been shared today that can inform what you're saying in your emails, your tweets, your social media swarms, and just trying to put as much pressure on them as possible. And following that, get involved with groups like Biofuelwatch, all the groups we've heard from today, Axe Drax, so we can keep putting pressure on them from as many angles as possible. And also working with groups to provide alternatives as well. So it's not just saying that we want you to take these subsidies away from Drax and Vattenfall are really terrible, but here's all the amazing things we could do with them and how powerful that could be. So I think that's pretty much what I have to say. The social media toolkit has this all laid out. Hopefully that'll be very helpful.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Merry. And we've got a few minutes left. Does anyone have any questions for Merry or any questions that haven't been asked yet? And Kaya has mentioned that there is a Fridays for Future campaign to stop burning biomass. And Kaya, if you're in touch with the Fridays for Future group who are doing that, that would be absolutely incredible. We did have one question for Tegan that came up about COP26 and whether you felt, Tegan, that it was worthwhile, and did we make progress at COP26 against Drax, or was it largely preaching to the converted?
I think the actions like outside of the COP were really worthwhile and really impactful, and definitely felt by delegates at the conference itself. So there I would say absolutely yes. I wouldn't have as much enthusiasm about the impact of the negotiations themselves, which I think would come as very little of a surprise. However, I think, like, you know, from my perspective, we really were focused in on the Canadian delegation and the ministers from Canada. And Canada and the UK are, you know, the co-chairs of the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And I think we learned a lot and like made some little steps forward in terms of how we could leverage that body, which both Canada and the UK seem to really hold dear in terms of, I mean, I don't know much about the UK, but Canada has very little to point to in terms of environmental success stories. And so this Power and Best Coal Alliance is like something that is held in quite high regard. And so the ways that we can like leverage that legacy is actually like part of what it's done and intentionally is facilitate the rise of the biomass industry is useful. And I think that there's a lot of ways we can push for forests as a climate solution as part of the COP as well moving forward. And so that there were some promising things, I will say, to be optimistic. But I think the actions that people took outside were really impactful and successful.
Amazing, thank you so much. We're almost out of time, so I'll just add in a couple of final links. Firstly, if you'd like to get updates from Biofuelwatch, you can find out about all the different campaigns standing up to Vattenfall and Drax, and also the link for next Wednesday's action. It would be brilliant if you'd like to take part online, or if you'd like to take a photo anywhere in the world and you can share it on social media. You can also send it to Biofuelwatch and we can share it for you if you don't have Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And I would just like to finish, maybe could I ask each speaker if you'd like to give us a 1-minute final message for everyone on why we really need to take action next week to stand up to Drax and Vattenfall. And maybe could we start with Rita?
I think that the most important thing to share is that citizen action works. Just last month, community members in a small town in Lumberton, North Carolina, after months, I think even a year and a half of protesting against a facility from being built, learned that the energy company was abandoning their plans to build the plant. And we think that that is largely due to the amount of organizing that went against it. So I think that if we can learn anything from them, it's to not give up and to not let your voices be squelched. It's amazing how much policymakers really do eventually cave to hearing people's complaints. So I'm very appreciative of all of y'all here and all your hard work.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, and really inspiring that we can put pressure on our policymakers, both in America, Canada, the UK, and Estonia, to do more to protect forests. Thank you so much. And Tegan, would you like to give us a 1-minute inspiration on why we really need to take action next week?
Absolutely, and I will echo that I'm so grateful for everyone for taking action. As we talked about before, you know, Drax really has a monopoly on the wood pellet sector in British Columbia, and we're seeing these forests fall to make pellets to burn there. And it really is, you know, the subsidies in the UK and the power of this company that's helping to drive that, as well as the really terrible policies we have in British Columbia. So I think, you know, you all taking action there and at Drax, and combined with folks here taking action to protect forests on the ground, is incredibly powerful, and the kind of solidarity, you know, that we really need to make change. And so thank you, and I hope, you know, you can be a voice for those forests at the AGM next week.
Amazing, thank you ever so much. And Farištamo, would you like to give us 1 minute on why we need to take action? why it's so important next week?
I think it is important to take an action because nobody else will probably, and it is kind of easier to listen these comforting, softening messages that come from industries that say that we need economic growth, we need this and that, we need green energy from biomass and so on. I think that we owe it to something bigger than we are. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much. Merry, could you finish off for us and tell us a little bit about why we need to take action to stand up to Drax and Vattenfall next week? Thank you.
Also, I just want to echo what everyone said. It's really amazing to see you all here, and thank you all the speakers. I think it's so important everywhere, and particularly in the UK, because once again, the UK is funding destruction abroad and profiting off it. You know, British companies are profiting off destruction and exploitation around the world. And it's so vital that we stand up in the way of against those harms in solidarity with these communities. Like, we have the power to do this. No change has ever come from people on top. It's come from grassroots mobilization and people taking action. We can do that. We have that power. So I think just bringing all of us together, bringing our voices together, putting our bodies in the way of these harms is the most important thing we can do, particularly in these times of climate crisis, and the most powerful thing we can do. So a great way to start or continue that is by getting involved next week and continuing to stay involved, because it's got to stop. This industry is horrible.
That's incredibly powerful. Thank you so much, Merry, and a massive thank you to our wonderful speakers tonight, to Rita from Dogwood Alliance, to Tegan from Stand.Earth, to Farištamo from Save Estonia's Forests, to Almut from Biofuelwatch, and to Merry from the Axe Drax group. Huge thank you, and a massive thank you to everyone for joining tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant to be here with you tonight, and thank you for your great questions. I'm sorry if we didn't manage to get through every question, but we'll save the chat and we'll see if we can answer some of them again. And huge thank you to you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much, and hopefully be lovely to see your photos next week. Bye bye. Thank you.